offshore anything. This is a Chicago-based hackathon. It's going to happen in Chicago, all right? The other thing is, I would ask, I don't want anybody to leave here who's not a developer, not on the team. I would ask the engineers and the designers and the coders here to be proactive about engaging folks who are here who probably have very good ideas, even if they don't have the skills to actually write the code. In fact, the hackathons that I've been to, and I've been to dozens of them, are always enriched by folks who come at it from a different angle. So that would just be an ask that I make of you. So now for the thanks. Thanks to AT&T for doing this. This is really the biggest sort of corporate partnership that we've done for a hackathon, and it's a very full room. It's very good food and lots of expertise from outside of Chicago. So we're grateful for you guys for doing that. And thanks to you for showing up on a Friday night during Taste of Chicago. This is way more fun than Robert Plant, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. So last year, this is an executive order, so it is as good as law inside the city of Chicago, basically mandating that open data become part of regular operating procedures in every department in the city. It's not a nice to have, it's not a fad, it's not for political transparency, it's for people to make things. It's to change the city into a platform for development. And we take that very seriously. We don't really make many apps in the city. In fact, philosophically, we think that you and the free market and other developers are way better at coming up with the applications that make the city easier to use and live in than we are. We're the APIs, we're the back end, we're the documentation. Now, you're very much encouraged to use the county and the state and federal data sets, and probably there will be winners tonight that don't use any of this, but I want to walk you through a little bit of what we've done to kind of enable the innovation that I hope we're going to see this weekend. There's 4 reasons that we do this. The first is probably the least interesting. It's that publishing the vital signs of the city is a form of political transparency, and that builds trust, or rebuilds it in some cases. One of the things you'll probably hear about, or I think I might even have a slide, is so one of the smallest things we ever did was expose the location of our snowplows during winters. Because we've been managing those fleets via GPS for years. We thought we'd just put it online. Crushes our website traffic records. Every year we do that. And you're thinking, it's like, that's not really useful. You can't ride a plow like a bus or a train. But actually allowing people to peer into how government works is still very valuable to citizens. They want to see where their money's going, they want to see how it's working. So that's a sort of a category of applications. Making visible what has been otherwise kind of a black box for government. Accountability, this is really an internal thing, but publishing our performance data, which you all have access to, and you'll get the URL shortly, keeps me and the 30,000 other people who work for the city of Chicago accountable, because you see how long it's taking to issue a business license, or how long it's taking to fix a pothole, those sorts of things. It helps for process improvement. Where you guys come in and work is really interesting is using the data for analysis to find things that we didn't know existed before, like correlations between one type of action in a neighborhood and an outcome that on paper seem unrelated, right? Like alley lights being out and trash cans going missing. It helps us prioritize how we address issues in the city across departments, which governments typically have not been good at. But data is irrespective of the sort of bureaucratic silos of a government. They show where the interconnections are. And we do this internally, but the applications that we've seen developed over the last 2 years have shown us all kinds of correlations between, say, foodborne illness and rodent baiting, or crime and foreclosure rates. All this stuff is raw material for you to work with. You may be thinking, well, I was just going to build the next CTA app, and you very much should do that. But I would also encourage you to think of apps not just as, how do I report my pothole easier, but how do I expose connections between the things that happen in a city that might make it easier for me, or might make it easier for city government. And then the last one is, and we've seen this, is you're going to come up with apps today, but I would love to see it actually spark something in you to create a business from it. There are some companies here in 1871 that do that. There are examples outside of Chicago where the business is founded on reading and writing from government. If you think about how radical that is, right? You're doing business with the city without having to go through the sort of procurement maze that is government. You're working with us from the periphery. That's a huge shift, and I think one that you should think about as an opportunity. So just very quickly, in the news this week, so maybe we've gone mainstream. I mean, we were in the Tribune, It was, so the Tribune is giving actual ink to the applications that are making Chicagoans' lives better. And I just saw Melissa 2 nights ago and told her about this hackathon, and she's like, that's an even better story. So, I'm not saying $5,000 is anything to shrug at, but I would love something like this she wants this to be an ongoing column about the way the community is creating things that make the city better. But even more interesting is the rollout of the Divvy bikes. If you live or work down here, we're in phase 1 of this, but by the end of the year there'll be 4,000 of these spread around the city with 400 stations. Now, why is that interesting to us here in the room? Those are 4,000 network endpoints. They are all on the network, they all have GPS, and they all generate data that shows us something that's very hard for the city to know, which is, where do people actually go? I mean, it's all anonymous data. We know where the trains go, we know roughly where cars go, buses and things like that, but that sort of last mile is unknown. That data is all available. We wrote into the contract with the vendor that an official API we put together, which they're still sort of shining up, but 4 days after this launched, there was an unofficial API created, and you'll have access to that here too. Think about it, it's a distributed sensor network, if you think about it that way. Right now it has no sensors on it, but eventually we plan to put environmental sensors on at least a subset of these bikes, carbon dioxide, things like that, and the beauty of it is we don't get to choose where it goes. So in a sense, it's a randomized network that will tell us how the city is doing. And that's just one example of how we're moving from the data in the portal, not just being about like how many contracts got signed by the city, but actually vital signs about the built environment, about the physical things in the city, sensors in the bridges, bikes as pieces of infrastructure. That really is kind of the next wave of open data. So you guys are here, as part of a hackathon. And this is one of my favorite sites. I don't think Josh was here, but School Cuts was a site that went up as we were consolidating schools. I'm sure you read about it. 50 schools closed and consolidated, and then the receiving schools. This was a map that that was built on our data outside of the city that helped parents and educators, and eventually even us, figure out the logistics of doing that. You could search to see statistics about the schools that were being closed down, where those children would go, and the other challenges that they would face, both from a safety perspective and from a transportation perspective. Now, the reason I throw this up here is to say, as you think about what problems you want to solve, the little secret about the best apps that get built on our data is it usually happens when we upset people, when we make people mad. And we don't do that on purpose, obviously, but it's true. The best things that we've ever seen is when people have a sort of fire in their belly about solving a problem. So what I would ask you to do is think about, I can tell you what the mayor's priorities are: public safety, education, economic development. But you can't write an app to that. You have to take it all the way down to street level and say, okay, if education is something that the city cares about, what's a very specific use case? Now, you might not be parents, you might not be thinking about that, but so pick another one. Like, what bugs the hell out of you about your commute, right? Wouldn't it be great if my bus tracker app also told me, why don't you skip the next stop because the bike station's empty at that stop, and I know you want to take the public bike from there. That hasn't happened yet. I bet it will this weekend. A merger of those two sets of data, right? Take it as granular, as specific as you can, and solve that problem. So, this is an amazing site. There's the snowplows, which I showed you. This is a guy, Steve Vance. I don't think he's here, but he's an avid biker, and he wanted to know where all the bike crashes were, and such that there wasn't data. He wanted to be able to crowdsource that data. This is just a perfect example of someone who he built it for himself, right? And it's useful for thousands of people. So, I wouldn't I guess what I'm saying is don't overthink, like, what does the city need? Or what's going to appeal to the broadest? Build for yourself. Because in a city of almost 3 million people, there are other people like you. And if you put the passion of solving your own problem into it, it'll shine, you'll probably win a prize. So that's kind of the point here. Oh, this is really interesting, then I'm almost done. Okay, you remember the TV show Boss? Yeah, remember that show? Yeah. The theme was done by Robert Plant, who's singing it probably right now in Grant Park. It was filmed here for 2 seasons. To film anything here, like any city, you have to get a film permit, okay? And so those film permits are public data, they're open data. So in between the first